We're going to take a look at the 7 Years' War from 1754 to 1763. And basically what we're going to do with this is we're just going to understand the pertinence of this war in relation to this course, U.S. History 1, 1301. It is profoundly important to understand the consequences of this war. The details of the war are important, but for purposes of this class, we're not going to go too much into that. But what we are going to take a look at is a very ironic event. The father of the country, George Washington, is going to actually unwittingly begin this war. So let's take a quick look at this video, and then we'll get into the consequences of the 7 Years' War.
The French and Indian War. But the day it all began, there was nothing heroic about the father of his country. To be fair, Washington is only 22. Ambitious and a little naive, he doesn't realize he's about to become a pawn in a chess game he doesn't understand.
They are here.
Washington's orders are to drive the French from this contested part of the frontier, with force if necessary. He doesn't know these French soldiers are on a diplomatic mission. The eager young major doesn't take the time to find out what the French are after.
Fire!
It's George Washington's first taste of battle, and he likes it.
I can, with truth, assure you that I heard the bullets whistle. Believe me, there was something charming in the sound.
Their retreat cut off by Washington's Indian allies, the French surrender within minutes. Their officer sits wounded.
This is Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers de Jumonville. He's an envoy. Here's a letter from his commander.
I do not speak French, do you?
Under the protocol of the day, Washington is responsible for the well-being of the wounded Frenchman. But he soon realizes that this deep in the woods, different rules apply.
Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père.
It turns out this Indian leader, known as the Half-King, has his own agenda. Within minutes, the Half-King's warriors plunder the French camp, scalping the dead and wounded before they leave. The massacre is not an outcome Washington expected, nor could he have foreseen the consequences. This incident will trigger an all-out war for North America that soon spreads around the world. We call it the French and Indian War. This is the story of a war that helped create a new nation no one could ever have predicted. This is the story of the war that made America.
Okay, just to underscore what the clip was basically going through, it was talking about how this war was a war between the French and the English fought on 3 different continents. It was fought in India, it was fought in Europe, and it was fought mainly in North America, also in the Caribbean as well. The war was sparked and really over this part of the earth right here, the Ohio River Basin. It was highly fertile land. English colonists had been beginning to settle there, and the English had set up a couple of forts in this area, and this was greatly concerning the French. Also, the French are setting up forts on this area right here, and the English are greatly worried about this. And so when Washington moves into this area, he's basically going to spark a lot of these tensions that had been developing for the last 10 or 15 years or so. And it's going to initiate the French-Indian War. One of the immediate unintended consequences of the French-Indian War from the perspective of the English was the Albany Plan of Union 1754. The Albany Plan of Union was a plan to place the British North American colonies under a more centralized government. It was called forth by Benjamin Franklin, and the plan was adopted in July 10th, 1754 by representatives from the 7 of the British North American colonies. 5 of them couldn't, or 6 of them couldn't go because of weather concerns. It didn't lead to any. Then there was also a few Indian nations that were involved in negotiations. Basically, what they tried to do was to create a centralized plan for self-defense of how the colonists would fight the war and whatnot. Now, what's significant about the Albany Plan, it's the first time that the colonist leaders are getting together and beginning to organize, right? And this is going to develop or initiate the relationships that will further develop after this war in 1763, when tensions are going to begin to rise between the British and its colonies. So the Albany Plan of 1754, when the war begins, is the first unintended consequence that the British did not anticipate here. That's going to give rise to the unification process that's going to eventually lead to independence in 1776, right? So this is the tiny little spark that's going to lead to major consequences in the future. The other thing it's going to lead to is the fact how the British quartered troops in colonists' homes. It's going to cause a little bit of resentment. They're not going to particularly like this. This is later going to lead, once the second U.S. Constitution is adopted, and the Bill of Rights is introduced, the Third Amendment. So to this day, troops can't crash at your pad because they need a place to stay for a national defense. It's going to lead to that. And also, the colonists are going to begin to see how the British treated the French, and particularly the Acadians, the French settlers along the Ohio Valley, who were forced to flee down to Louisiana, who will become the Cajuns, right, named after the Acadians later on. But they were treated particularly bad, and this begins kind of a wake-up call to the colonists that the British are playing a mean game of empire, and the implication of being involved in that is going to cast the British in a new light for the colonists. And once tensions begin, it's going to give rise to, well, it will give fodder for propaganda for people like Sam Adams about how cruel the British could be. And they can just look at the historic treatment of French settlers. So when the war is over, you have the Treaty of Paris of 1763, not to get it confused with the 1783 Treaty of Paris, which was the treaty that settles the Revolutionary War between the United States and Great Britain. So the Treaty of Paris, 1763, is the treaty that ends the French-Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. And basically, if you look at this map, here are the consequences of that. The French are going to be pushed back into the Louisiana Territory, and the British are going to gain all of this territory right here. And so, yahoo, the colonists are very happy that they won this war. Not really. They're going to be quite upset because of the line that is drawn right here. So the Proclamation Line of 1763 is going to initiate a spark of tensions between the colonists and Great Britain. So to reiterate, the British won vast territory in North America after the 7 Years' War, but with it came numerous problems on how to govern it. British officials were unable to balance the interests of the colonists and the Indians, and these conflicts led to colonial dissatisfaction with imperial rule, and ultimately it's going to lead to the tensions that are going to result to the American Revolution. So basically the consequence is that in order to squelch further or potential threats between colonists and Native Americans past the Proclamation Line of 1763, basically this line said that there will be no future settlements of colonists beyond that line. And this is going to anger and frustrate a lot of colonists because they felt we just fought a war to push back the threat and to take advantage of the potential wealth that might be available in the Ohio Valley. And so from 1763 on up until 1776, you're going to have a series of events that is going to make war and independence finally inevitable between Great Britain and its then former colonies. So to recap what the French-Indian War and what's important to know for this class, again, it lasted from 1754 to 1763. It was between France and England. They called it the 7 Years' War, fought here and in Europe. It was disputed over land, mainly the Ohio River basin. The effects: it was an economic boon for the colonies, and so this is going to put them in a position to give them confidence to later defy Great Britain. It forced the colonies to work together, beginning with the Albany Plan. Colonies would have to pay for protection as a consequence of the French-Indian War, and so this is going to lead to the introduction of taxes on the colonies. And this is going to be of huge significance because it's going to lead to the conflict between the colonists and Great Britain over the whole issue of, as it was famously said, no taxation without representation. And the Proclamation Line of 1763 kept colonists east of that line in the Appalachian Mountains, which is going to also cause resentment